Welcome to Audiobooks, Mom. Dive into the classics with us. Hit the like button, subscribe, and let's immerse ourselves in the pages of history together. Enjoy the audiobook. The Ancient Gods of the Mexicans. Travelers attest that a change from familiar sights to new experiences, whether in places far or near, refreshes and reinvigorates the entire being. Certain locales accomplish this stimulation by being more colorful, richer in lore, tradition, evidences of past glory, and less restrained than others. Such a place is our sister republic, Mexico. But the new viewpoint must be focused through the individual. The moment a monolingual American crosses the border between the United States and Mexico, he is handicapped by a language barrier. Travel agencies, automobile clubs, friends of friends, all may conspire to direct the stranger to the physical comforts and material benefits of the country. But if the visitor has not briefed himself on numerous facts about the history and progress of the Mexican people, he probably will relapse into the role of an average tourist, instead of that of an eager searcher for new experiences and a revitalized life. It is one thing to tour the cathedrals, archaeological sites, souvenir shops, and to do the popular spots and spas. It is quite another thing to open the heart in full response to the ancient spirit of Mexico, or of any strange place in which the traveler might find himself. Some people are able to prepare and condition the soul in advance to welcome the unknown, but most of us live to regret that we must culture the seeds of experience in retrospect. Mexico is a close neighbor whose customs and temperament contrast vividly with our own. It is not enough just to visit the sights and scenes of Mexico's past and present glories, or to speak brokenly, if at all, with natives to gain an insight and understanding that will enable us to grow and broaden with the new experiences. The contrasts between Mexico and our country are strong, even where we try to observe parallels of relationship. Both of our nations are republics won through bloodshed. We belong to a predominantly European stock that broke away from traditional ties. The Mexicans are predominantly of native or prehistoric stock who have won back their republic from an alien conqueror. We sustain a variety of religious beliefs, principally Christian. The Mexicans are nominally and devoutly Roman Catholic at the same time that they are reminded daily and on all sides by monuments and place names of the ancient gods of the Toltecs, Aztecs, Mayas, and various tribal we possess unbroken historical records in our own language of people, events, places, names, dates. Mexican history begins with the conquest by the Spaniards. Only tradition and conjecture of prior times survive. The Spanish conquerors of the Mexicans ruthlessly destroyed all records to which they could set the torch. They killed off the rulers, priests, intellectuals. They prefixed the names of Christian saints to the old Indian place names, the compound names still being used. The conquerors could not stamp out the ancient languages in the speech of the people, and many dialects of the Valley of Anahuac still are spoken, but the native no longer can interpret with certainty the glyphs on the ancient monuments as they are being excavated, or in the few surviving manuscripts. The present is able to speak for itself, to answer utilde questions, if any, that the traveler may ask. The challenge lies in learning more about the mysteries that surround the mute evidences of architectural skills and highly developed handicrafts that have survived the vandalism of the Spanish conquerors. The calendar stones, the pyramids, the sculptured monoliths are all testimonies to a profound belief in a complicated pantheon of gods who were worshipped with magnificent rituals and ceremonies. Mr. Hall has collected a representative bibliography concerning the research into the beliefs and traditions of these earlier Americans. Critical evaluation of the various items is highly controversial. The reproductions of original Aztec and Mayan codices furnish unusual source material, and the original Codex Hall is a unique treasure to examine. When we plunge into the literature on the subject of the Toltecs, Aztecs, Mayas, and the related tribes, it is easy to lose all sense of direction and relationship in the mass of speculation and conjecture. It seems unbelievable that the simplest facts of pre-conquest history are hopelessly confused, while the ancient dialects are spoken by simple tillers of the soil and artisans of the humble crafts in the villages of Mexico and Guatemala. These remnants of prehistoric Mexico worship devoutly in Christian churches with the same faith that their ancestors had in the pagan gods and spirits, and the pride of race is strong and vital. Lucien Bayart, in his The Aztecs, 1887, says, "Have the names and worship of the gods from whom we have just brushed the dust completely disappeared from the memory of the modern Aztec? Do none of them remember the blood shed by their ancestors before the grinning images whose ruins now fill our museums? In a word, is the past dead in their memory, and has the new religion which has been forced upon them by the strong hand of the Spaniard completely effaced from their minds the redoubtable divinities formerly so highly venerated? For those who have lived among them, everything indicates that it has. Teotihuacan is a desert, and its forests, already venerable, cover the mountains on whose summits proud statues of Tlaloc, of Tezcatlipoca, and of Teotl were raised long ago. And still, in grottos unexpectedly discovered, I have frequently found myself in the presence of a figure of Mictlanteuctli, at the foot of which a recent offering of food had been placed. Were these offerings a piece of homage to a proscribed god, or those of a modern wizard to the devil of the Christians? The Indian is mute when questioned on these matters, and the imagination is free to adopt either interpretation. When the Spaniards arrived, Mexico was known as the Valley of Anahuac, a Toltec name meaning situated near the water. There is no clear reason given for the name. The legendary inhabitants of the valley were the Olmecas, who had destroyed a race of giants who had occupied a part of Anahuac before them since the creation of the world. In the course of many centuries, there were a number of migrations from the north of tribes who broke away from a powerful nation called the Nahuatlacs, people who speak clearly. The locale of this nation is vague, and its people have never been positively identified. One of the tribes that migrated was the Aztecs. Bayart states that in the course of their wanderings, their god commanded that they take the name Mexi, as privileged children of Mexitli or Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. The history of pre-Spanish Mexico has been reconstructed after a fashion, but it is difficult to discriminate between fact, fiction, fancy, and falsification. The soldiers, in their greed for gold, were no respecters of the living or the dead. They robbed the temples and rifled the graves. The priests, in their zeal to turn the conquered Mexicans from their ancient traditions and religious institutions, systematically tried to obliterate all records of the past. The Indian temples, the Teocalli, houses of God, were razed and the stones used to build Christian churches on the same sites, the foundations covering the rubble. They searched everywhere for manuscripts that were confiscated and brought to the public squares, where they were thrown into mountainous heaps and burned in blazes that lighted the skies for many nights. The material records were destroyed as completely as it was humanly possible. But the race memory could not be eradicated so easily. The work of conversion proceeded unsatisfactorily in spite of the fact that the more difficult heretics were eradicated by the Inquisition. The fathers, in their writings, often deplored the tenacity with which the Indians held to the old gods. Shortly after the conquest of the Mexicans and the almost total destruction of their records, there were several attempts to reconstruct the history of the conquered tribes. Brother Bernard of Sahagun, 1499 to 1590, a Franciscan monk, devoted many years to the study of the Indian traditions. See Mr. Hall's article Sahagun in the summer 1956 issue of Horizon, with reproductions of pages from the Great Florentine Codex. He learned the Aztec language as he labored to convert the Indians, questioning them about their faith, their gods, and their tribal lore. For many years, he gathered the material used in compiling his History of the Things of New Spain, which was written in 12 sections or books. He submitted the manuscripts to his superiors for approval and publishing. At an official meeting of the chapter in 1570, it was agreed that the work was good, but that the professed poverty of the Franciscan order did not justify any expenditures in connection with this work. He was ordered to dismiss his copyists and to do any further work as best he could. Thus, the work was not condemned, but any further work on it was frustrated because Brother Bernard was too old and ill to write clearly. Sahagun prepared an abstract of the work which he sent to an influential friend in Spain. This was considered by his superiors as an act of insubordination, and all of his volumes of manuscripts were taken away from him and distributed to various convents in distant parts of the country. He had friends who shared his desire to see the work published, and several years later the manuscripts were ordered returned to him. A discussion of the Sahagun manuscripts is very confusing. Various copies were made. Sahagun made some corrections and changes as he went along. It is almost certain that portions of the work were lost, and many passages deleted and altered in the remaining text. Herrera, Torquemada, and others quote the Sahagun manuscripts and yet contradict each other. It was not until 1840 that what was represented to be the entire work was published. Bandelier states, 1932. It must not be forgotten that, since the copy turned over to Sañor Muñoz by the Franciscans of Tolosa was not complete, the work of Father Sahagun has never been integrally published, neither in London nor in Mexico. And the original manuscripts used in the publications have been lost and cannot be traced. Sahagun is important because he is quoted so frequently. He pursued his studies before all of the Mexicans had been converted, while there was still resistance to both soldiers and priests of the conquerors, and before the worship of the ancient gods passed from the experiences of living participants. It will never be known to what extent he won the confidence of those whom he consulted. It is unlikely that his Aztec friends revealed all they knew to him in spite of their apparent confidence. They probably recognized that his purpose in questioning them about their gods was not to revere them, but to study how he might turn the natives to the Christian faith. But there seems to have been considerable integrity and honesty in his reports, which might explain the opposition and censorship of his order, and the more than passive efforts to disperse his manuscripts so that they might rot and be forgotten. Everybody who has written on the ancient gods of Mexico has cribbed from other researchers, sometimes in part, sometimes in toto, and as we are more anxious to incite individuals to consult the authorities in the library, we shall not make this labored reading by citing all of the sources. The following are just interesting notes at random. A people of unknown ethnological origin, the Aztecs possessed the pattern of religion with the elements of a supreme deity served by lesser gods. There were gods of rain, fertility, fire, war, gods who instructed in the arts and crafts, gods who taught men to plant and to harvest, tutelary spirits of hearth and home. They had tales that described a heaven that existed before the creation of the universe, which culminated in the creation of earth and its creatures. Teotl was a supreme being, independent and absolute, invisible, so never represented in images, but described only by epithets as he who gives us life, he who embraces everything. He was opposed by an evil spirit, Tezcatlipoca, the reasoning owl, the enemy of the human race. This god allowed himself to be seen by men only to terrify them or to do them injury. Next to Teotl, the principal god of the Aztecs was Tezcatlipoca, shining mirror. He was considered the soul of the world and was regarded as the creator of heaven and earth. He rewarded the just and punished the evildoers by afflicting them with diseases. Whenever he trod on earth, he caused wars, enmities, and discord. He was the only one who could grant prosperity and wealth, and he was the only one who could take these away at will. The most amazing god of the Aztecs is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the god of the air and of wisdom. He seems to be a combination of a man and a god. He is described as a man with white skin, tall, with broad forehead, large eyes, long black hair, and a bushy beard. He had built for himself palaces of silver and precious stones. He taught the arts of smelting metal and working in stone. In his time, the earth produced enormous ears of corn and gourds. Cotton was raised whose wool was dyed by nature in growth. The reign of Quetzalcoatl was the golden age of the land. For some unknown reason, the gods revealed to him that he should betake himself to the imaginary kingdom of Tlapalan. His departure was long drawn out, ending with 4 young nobles accompanying him to a distant province. He then dismissed them with instructions to tell their people that he would shortly return to them. Whether Quetzalcoatl was of celestial origin or a great leader who has been deified, it is certain that he created a new religion based on fasting, penitence, and virtue. He was not of a native race, and when he left, he promised to return at the head of a band of white-faced men. This popular belief made the landing of the Spaniards easier because they were bearded white men wearing plumed helmets. The Aztecs observed many religious practices that were similar to those which the early fathers thought were peculiarly Christian. They had an interesting concept of confession. When the individual was moved to petition forgiveness, he consulted the priest, who selected a favorable day when he was to return. When the individual was moved to petition forgiveness, he consulted the priest, who selected a favorable day when he was to return. On the appointed day, he would come with a new mat, incense, and wood with which to make the fire to burn the incense. The priest would invoke the god as he threw incense on the fire and recommend that the god accept the penitence of the petitioner. The priest would then charge the petitioner, "Son, you have come into the presence of God, the helper and supporter of all. You came to tell him your inward shame and rottenness, to disclose unto him the secrets of your heart. Be careful not to lead a riotous life, nor throw yourself headlong into it, nor get lost by lying in the presence of our Lord. Rid yourself and throw out all your shame and disgrace in the presence of our Lord. Pour out your evil deeds in his presence." The penitent then took an oath by touching the soil with the middle finger of the right hand and carrying to his mouth the dust that adhered to it. He then recited his confession. Having performed his penance, he was careful not to repeat his offense because there was absolution only once for any sin. Hence, confession was observed by the older men rather than the young, apparently the theory being to sow a few wild oats before admitting the error of their ways. In the 5th month of their calendar, the Aztecs celebrated their principal religious festival. The time was close to the Christian Easter, and it is suggestive to note that they sacrificed to the god Tezcatlipoca, a young man without a blemish on his body, who had been carefully prepared during the preceding year. The Aztecs called the gods to witness their veracity, the form of their oath being, "Perchance is not the eye of God upon me." The oath was of great value in tribunals, for it was believed that no one would be rash enough to invoke the name of the gods untruthfully. The early fathers have stressed the element of human sacrifice and cannibalism in the Indian rites. There is no doubt that human sacrifice was practiced, but that it would be on the vast scale of thousands at a time seems to be absolutely incompatible with the temperament of the people. It seems likely that the practice of human sacrifice was exaggerated by the Spaniards to discredit the beliefs of the Indians and to justify some of their own atrocious actions. Biart cites the following: "As a curiosity, we give a prayer that was addressed to Tezcatlipoca by his devotees, and which seems to be a paraphrase of the Lord's Prayer. This prayer is quoted without comment both by Sahagun and Torquemada. Mighty God, Thou who givest me life and whose slave I am, grant me the supreme grace of giving me meat and drink. Grant me the enjoyment of Thy clemency, that it may support me in my labors and my wants. Have pity on me who live sad, poor, and abandoned. And since I serve Thee by sweeping Thy temple, open to me the hands of Thy mercy." George C. Vaillant, in his Aztecs of Mexico, observes that the question of population pressure, so often an indirect cause for war in the Old World, was virtually non-existent in Indian America. War techniques, in consequence, were little developed in the Indian cultures, and the killing and rapine which took place during the white colonization did not have its origin in the Indian political attitudes. And further, the ceremonial aspect of life dominated the civil structure, and the remains of temples, not cities, gauge the splendor of the past. The italics are mine, because that is the impression that I carried away from Mexico. We hope that continuing research will accord a recognition of the ancient gods of Mexico to their rightful place in the memory of man, their place and participation in the grand procession of eternal cults that have inspired progress in the history of mankind. Thank you for listening with Audiobooks
We have
Mom.
touched only
If
on
you've
the
enjoyed this
Aztec
audiobook,
gods.
please
There is a
subscribe
vast
and join us
literature
again
to
for
be
more
consulted
timeless
for the
reading.
Mayas of
Until
Yucatan
next
and
time.
Guatemala.